Hello! So, Season 2 of the live-action remake of Avatar: The Last Airbender is coming out on my birthday, so I thought it was a sign for me to finally talk about Season 1 of this show. As you can probably already tell, I am a fan of the original animated series. I watched it when I was a kid, I watched it again in my teenage years, and I rewatched it again as an adult. And every time I had a wonderful experience and was able to take away different things from this story. So, the original Avatar animated series is one of the best Western shows ever made, and it's not just my opinion, it's just an objective fact. So, naturally, people had very high expectations for the Netflix live-action remake that were obviously not met. I watched Season 1 when it came out in 2024 and I rewatched it again in 2026 to prepare for this video and also Season 2, and my conclusion is that Season 1 wasn't great, but it also wasn't terrible. And I know that ever since HBO's Chernobyl, people have been using this phrase ironically, but I mean it literally. The live-action remake of Avatar Season 1 wasn't great, but it also wasn't terrible. I think the worst episodes were the first two episodes. I can't blame anyone who dropped this show after watching episode 1 or episode 2. Then we get to episode 3 and 4, and while they were still rough, but at least they were a bit more entertaining and had a semblance of a soul. And the last 4 episodes were genuinely good. Don't get me wrong, they had many flaws and I won't hesitate in tearing some things apart in my discussion, but overall, the last 4 episodes were enjoyable. Talking about Season 1 as a whole, there were many moments where I could see the vision, but it was the execution that was severely lacking. And execution, is something that can be improved, and that's why I believe that Season 2 is still salvageable. But this video isn't about Season 2. I want to specifically revisit Season 1, give my general thoughts on it, and also compare some elements to the original series. Which means that yes, I will talk about spoilers from the original cartoon without holding back, so if for whatever reason you haven't seen the original show yet, please go do that. It's a pretty short series, but it's a story that sticks with you for life. Going back to the live-action remake, I have many notes, and when I thought about how I should structure this video, I decided that I should start with discussing the characters, because after all, this is what the original cartoon was all about. It was about people, it was about the characters and the relationships between them. So I'll start this discussion with something positive and something simple, and that is Zuko and Iroh. I think most people have either Iroh or Zuko as their favorite character from the original cartoon, and I am no exception. Maybe this is stupid of me to say, but as long as this remake can nail these two characters and their relationship, then honestly I don't care if the rest of the plot lines are horrible. Like, genuinely, this element of this story is enough for me to carry the whole series, and luckily the live action did Zuko and Iroh stuff genuinely well. I have almost no notes. First, Zuko's actor nailed that role. I think he brought the perfect energy for playing this character. There was a scene at the start of episode 2, and I'll just insert a clip right now.
Your notebook may have been useful in collecting your thoughts, but your unceasing effort is what led you to the Avatar.
He ran!
This single line, unironically, was the moment when I knew that I would like this version of Zuko. Unfortunately, I can't say the same thing about Iroh. When taken alone, This Iroh didn't have the same gravity as the original cartoon Iroh, but his relationship with Zuko was still written wonderfully, and there's also one specific aspect about the live-action Iroh that I absolutely adored, and I will talk about that later when we get to my general Season 1 thoughts. But going back to this relationship, the flashback scene of Lu Ten's funeral made me cry, and not just tear up, but like properly cry. They really leaned into how much Zuko means to Iroh. And obviously playing Leaves from the Vines during that scene was just plain cheating, but I can't even be too mad about it. But for now, let's take a break and move on from the characters who were kept most intact to the character who was massacred the most, and that is my girl Katara. This hurts. I believe she fell victim to the modern concept of a strong female character where they wrote the female part, they wrote the strong part, but they completely forgot to write the character part. All I can say about the live-action Katara is that she was there. That's it. She was in the show. She had zero personality and no character conflicts. The only character arc she was given in Season 1 was learning how to bend, and even that was done exceptionally poorly. Like, let's look at the original cartoon, Katara and her bending journey. Was she a waterbending prodigy? Yes. Did she still have to struggle to get good? Also yes. We saw how driven and hardworking she was. She was so desperate to learn bending that she was willing to steal a waterbending scroll, while in the live action she was just given that by Gran. In the original series, we saw how frustrated she was when she couldn't get those forms, and then Aang showed up, someone who seemingly didn't even care about waterbending as much, and he just did those moves on his first try, and we saw how much it affected Katara. Then we got to the Northern Water Tribe, where she learned bending with a proper guidance from Master Paku. And was it a stretch that she became a master herself so quickly? Yes, but at least there was some training. The live action deleted all of that. This is the first example out of many where the live action tried to fix things that weren't broken to begin with. So the live action Paku refused to train Katara, and actually I liked that he stayed in his old stubborn ways, because if I'm being honest, I was never a fan of the whole him being engaged to Gran thing. But the problem is that the live action didn't offer any alternatives to Master Paku. Katara just read a single scroll about waterbending that she received from her grandmother, and suddenly she was a master. It was such a stupid scene when she fought Zuko at the end of Season 1, and he said the exact same line as he did in the original series, which is, "You little peasant, you found a master, haven't you?" And then Katara replied, "Yes, you're looking at her." Like, girl, no. The writers of this live-action remake tried to erase any traces of misogyny so hard that they ended up doing the opposite and completely failed their female cast. This line wasn't cool. It was plain stupid, and it felt like a self-indulgent fanfic written by a 12-year-old. Another absolutely moronic scene was when Katara brought all the healers to the fight. Like, it's a beautiful sentiment on the surface, and it could have been a very powerful scene, but the problem is that the moment you try to pull on a thread, everything falls apart. None of these women know how to fight. They've spent their entire lives using bending exclusively for healing. So sending them into battle was the same, like literally the same as the Fire Nation sending a battalion of new recruits to the front lines. It was so stupid. Sure, at least it was presented as their choice to fight for their homes, but it was still so stupid. And funnily enough, I actually think that both these stupid scenes could have been easily fixed. Imagine if the woman in the Northern Water Tribe had been learning waterbending fighting techniques in secret for all these years, and when Katara arrived, they taught her to fight too, obviously also in secret. This way you could have kept the message about women's strength and resilience and independence without making the plot feel too stupid. The only Katara scene that I liked was when she told Jed how the memories of her mother had been interfering with her bending, and Jed told her that she should think about her mother when she was still alive instead of her death. But a single scene in a whole season is not enough. And even then, it was more about Jet than Katara. And the creators somehow even managed to undermine their own scene later on. For example, I thought that this scene had a lot of potential to make Katara and Jet's relationship more interesting, where the foundation wouldn't be a crush, but instead a genuine, deep emotional connection where Jet genuinely helped Katara. But instead of presenting Katara's inner conflict, the creators just had to throw in that line where she said that it wasn't Jet, it was all her. Katara girl-bossed in this live-action remake too hard, and that is not a compliment. I need season 2 to give her some actual personality. The fact that Toph is coming in season 2 might make things a bit easier. Exploring their girlhood can serve as an entry point to giving Katara a bit more real personality. Next, let's move on to the other Southern Water Tribe sibling and talk about Sokka. Fun fact is that if we talk about the original cartoon, then Sokka unironically was my second favorite character after Zuko. Unfortunately, this is not the case for the live-action remake. Cartoon Sokka was the meat and sarcasm guy. The live-action Sokka is the veggies and straight-talk fella. I really disliked him when I first watched this show in 2024. However, my opinion shifted in a positive direction after a rewatch. This Sokka is different, sure, but at least the writers tried to write a character arc for him, which is way more than I can say about Katara. He experienced quite a bit of struggle with the feeling of inadequacy, and I really loved what was done with that flashback scene with his father. By the time we got to the Northern Water Tribe, I really empathized with Sokka's feelings. But once again, that's not really enough, and I still found Sokka a bit lacking in his personality. For example, what was the point of removing the fact that he was sexist at the beginning of the original series? Like, God forbid any of your characters have flaws that they learn to overcome. It would be such a tragedy if any of your characters grew over the course of the series. What a concept. No. They have to be born perfect and make no mistakes. The reason why I loved the original cartoon Sokka so much was precisely because he was perfectly flawed. And there were some aspects where he changed, like, for example, learning that his misogyny was wrong And there were some things where he didn't change and he remained this imperfect yet beautiful character. So overall, while I don't dislike the live-action Sokka anymore, but the second I begin comparing him to the original, all I can see is the downgrade. Next, it's finally time to talk about our protagonist. If I had to rank the characters, then I'd put Aang above Katara, but below Sokka. This Aang is not the Aang that I knew, and it's such a shame because the actor is actually perfect. He just had a very shit script that he had to work with. So Aang's journey in the original cartoon can be roughly summarized by the titles of the first and the last episodes, how he went from the boy in the iceberg to the Avatar Aang. The live-action Aang, on the other hand, already starts off as the Avatar, only without the skills to back it up. He's so serious all the time. He accepts his responsibilities immediately. And I think that the first scene that ruined everything after that was the moment of Aang running away. In the original animated show, that moment was everything. Aang struggled with the knowledge of being the Avatar for a while. He struggled with how much his life changed because of it, and the only connection he still had to his childhood was monk Gyatso. So, when he overheard that he would be separated from Gyatso, Aang ran away. And this is crucial. It was his choice. And for the rest of the series, we watched him grapple with that immeasurable guilt and shame of running away from his responsibilities. Now, let's compare it to the live-action remake. Aang left to clear his head with the intention to come back, and he got caught in that storm not out of desperation but out of stupidity, apparently. So for the rest of the series, every time he was blamed for running away from his responsibilities, it bothered me so much because that's not what the show showed us. He didn't run away. It was just an accident, not an active character choice. And there were so many problems with the writing in general, but they were especially noticeable with Aang's character. But I think I'll talk about those problems later in a separate section. Let's move on to a few side characters, and I want to say something positive because it's been a while since I said something good in this discussion. Zhao was one of the most delightful characters in season 1. I can understand not liking any part of this remake at all, even if personally I did find some things to like. But one thing I wouldn't be able to understand is not liking this version of Zhao. Like, by that point, you just must be immune to enjoying things altogether. Every single scene with him was delightful. His line deliveries and facial expressions were golden. His face felt so punchable in every single frame he was in, and it was just wonderful. The only thing that I hated was his ending. Zhao's death was one of the most memorable scenes in the original cartoon. Zuko tried to help him, despite Zhao's attempt to literally kill him, but Zhao was just too prideful and he refused that hand and chose death instead. And another thing that I always found very powerful was the fact that he was taken by the ocean spirit. Not a human, but specifically this raw, primal force of nature that wanted revenge. When the ocean took Zhao, it was left kind of ambiguous as to what it did to him. We didn't find out the answer until Korra, and that mystery felt so unsettling and powerful. Now let's compare it to the live-action remake. Zhao was about to attack Zuko, so Iroh killed him. Isn't it interesting? Once again, why are we fixing the scenes that already worked in the original? But the next group of characters that I want to discuss is Zuko's crew. The decision to expand their role in the story was easily my favorite change that this live-action remake made. They were turned from background characters to a meaningful part of the story. When by the end of the season, Iroh was comforting Zuko and told him that he was sure that the crew was alright, I felt that. I feel invested in the fate of this crew. And they didn't really get too much screen time, but the screen time that they got was used effectively. The core of this change is the fact that Zuko's crew came from the same battalion of new recruits that Zuko tried to save when he spoke up in Ozai's war meeting, and that's just a really beautiful connection that the live action added. I adored the scene where Iroh told Lieutenant G the truth and the soldiers bowed to Zuko. My only complaint is that technically G was the only one who heard what happened and didn't have the time to tell the others, which means that he was the only one who bowed out of genuine gratitude and respect, while the respect from everyone else was performative. But if we ignore this hole in logic, then that scene was truly powerful. Next, let's briefly discuss Suki. She's another character who was massacred alongside her relationship with Sokka. In the original, it was so great. She humbled Sokka, then he got on his knees to beg Suki to train him, and by the end of the episode, she had that great line that she is a warrior, but she's a girl too. Honestly, I think that Suki and Sokka was the only romantic relationship that I liked in the original series, and somehow the live-action remake managed to destroy this only good romantic pairing. I physically cringed watching episode 2. They just stared at each other because I guess they found each other attractive. Then there was that horrible scene where they trained for no actual narrative purpose while heavily panting at each other in a very cliché way, and eventually it was Suki who thanked Sokka for bringing the world to her. Honestly, this hurts as much as what was done to Katara's character. I think that Suki will be a bigger part of the story in season 2 compared to the original cartoon, so please just fix her. Next, I have a lot of thoughts about Ozai and Azula, and a lot of them are mixed thoughts. On a positive note, I loved the portrayal of Ozai. Original Ozai was a cartoonish villain, which worked for a cartoon. The live-action Ozai was still a villain, but he was so hypocritical, so manipulative. I loved how instead of just discarding Zuko, he used Zuko's name to manipulate Azula. For example, when he told her, "Your brother has done the impossible, just as I asked." There were also a couple of interesting moments that stood out, like Ozai crying while hurting Zuko, or Ozai telling that one guy, "Do not speak to me of loss." I think these moments heavily depend on the intention behind them. I really hope that the live action doesn't try to redeem Ozai in any way. It's not needed. Please allow your villains to just be villains. But the way how I personally interpreted those moments was just as another form of manipulation. Ozai has a massive ego, so maybe he genuinely believes that he is in the right, and maybe those tears were just crocodile tears, which would also tie into the whole theme of masks that was so big in episode 6. So overall, I have mixed feelings on this one. Next is Azula. Once again, very mixed feelings. I feel like this live action remake is making her too sympathetic too early, and I believe that she needs to become a terrifying force in season 2. Her scenes with Ozai were interesting, but that's kind of the problem. I feel like Ozai was turned into a bit more interesting character at the expense of Azula. And I don't think that it's wrong to foreshadow her eventual breakdown earlier than the original cartoon did, but this is just another example where the remake is trying to fix something that already worked. Next is Yue and Han. I appreciate the live action trying to give Yue a bit more personality. That was a good change in my opinion, and I also absolutely adore the decision to make Han a genuinely good guy. In the original cartoon, he was just a gag, one moment there and the next moment gone. But in the live action, he was put directly against Sokka. He was everything that Sokka wanted to be. A good warrior, a good leader, and on top of that, genuinely kind and respectful. The creators had a vision for a very interesting dynamic, but unfortunately, the execution once again wasn't quite there. First, Yue breaking off the engagement before we even got to the north had no weight behind it. There were no consequences. The live action could have at least shown that maybe her relationship with her father and the whole tribe got really bad or something like that. Because a character overcoming a challenge has no meaning behind it if it wasn't a real challenge to begin with. Just imagine if we had the original conflict from the cartoon, but with the live action Yue and a nice Han. It could have been beautifully messy. There's also one line that I will never stop making fun of, and that is Yue telling Sokka, Han is wonderful, but he is not the boy of my dreams. That was beyond cringe. And once again, just change this one little line and the entire arc suddenly becomes so much better. They could have expressed a similar sentiment with something softer. For example, something along the lines of, you can't control what your heart wants. So overall, I feel like this plotline and dynamic was improved, but not as much as it could have been. The next character is an interesting case, and that is Bumi. Personally, I absolutely adored what was done with him. Aang recognized him immediately, and instead of a playful, crazy old man, Bumi was presented as this leader who just got so tired of the war that it drove him mad. Because yes, this is what war could do to a person. I loved his speech on the impossible choices that he had to make day after day for a whole century. So personally, when taken out of context, Bumi's live-action version really worked for me. The only problems are that, first, the way how he blamed Aang fell flat when we were shown that Aang never intentionally ran away. Instead of a justified crash out, this scene felt more like an old man harassing this child for no good reason. And secondly, I'm not sure how this changes Bumi's future role in this story, including his involvement with the White Lotus. I liked the changes made to Bumi in the short term, but I'm afraid this will cause more problems in the long term. Next is Appa and Momo. Appa's CGI was appropriately cute, Momo also looked fine, and that's pretty much all I have to say about them. In the original cartoon, they were actual characters, they felt like an actual part of the group, but in the live action, they were just background elements. That's not really surprising. The live action as a medium has its limitations, and Appa and Momo's characterizations were just a natural consequence of that. And that was most of the character stuff that I managed to fit into a semblance of a structure for this discussion. So now let's get messy with the rest of my notes. This show had many writing problems. First of all, it was just boring in so many places. There was so much exposition that no one really needed. There was too much telling and not enough showing, and let's look at some specific examples. In the original cartoon, the first line that Aang ever spoke was asking Katara, "Will you go penguin sledding with me?" And this single line immediately told us so much about his character. He woke up on a different continent, surrounded by strangers, and that was his first concern. Now let's look at the live action. Aang had this monologue of "I know who I am" delivered to Appa. Okay, so he told us who he is, but there wasn't a single scene in the entire first season where he would display any of the qualities that he had listed. Another example is comparing the first 5 minutes of the original show versus the remake. In the cartoon, in the first few minutes, we got a clear characterization for both Katara and Sokka and for their relationship. We saw how bending was affected by strong emotions. We learned so much in so little time, and the audience was immediately endeared to some of these characters and their stories. Now let's look at the live action. There was some fighting I did not care about. We also saw Sozin, which I also didn't care about. Like, you can easily erase the first 5 minutes of the live action and nothing changes. But if you erase the first 5 minutes of the cartoon, then everything falls apart. There were so many scenes that felt empty and had no emotional impact compared to the corresponding scenes in the original. For example, in the remake, it was Gran who told Aang that all his people are dead, and he just accepted that. And before that, we literally started the episode with the night of the Sozin's Comet and the Fire Nation attacking the Air Temple. And I don't understand the point of that. It added absolutely nothing to the narrative. And let's compare it to the original cartoon. Aang was in deep denial that he was the last Airbender and that 100 years passed and that all his friends were dead. And then he goes home and sees Gyatso's dead body and it breaks him. And you know what? It breaks the audience too, because we got attached to this boy. And this change feels especially pointless when the live-action Aang still went to the Southern Air Temple. He still found Gyatso's body. He still went into his avatar rage mode. So why not just keep that without all the pointless scenes that were shown before that. And while I'm on this topic, I have to talk about that grand monologue. You know exactly which one I'm talking about. It was the worst scene I watched in 2024, and it was the worst scene I had the displeasure of rewatching in 2026. I feel like if this scene was deleted, then the entire live action remake would immediately get 10% better. That's how bad that single scene was. There were other things that I personally think should have been cut, for example, the Cave of Two Lovers or the Mechanist. The way how these plot lines were written for the live action added nothing substantial to the story. They just took up the space that could have been used for more important things. Another thing I hated was the repetition. Every single episode they repeated the same things over and over and over again, and it was especially noticeable with Aang. Every episode he spoke about how this is my responsibility and I have to go to the Northern Water Tribe, but I also have to help the people in this village too. And how I don't have to save the world alone because I have my friends with me. I feel like I heard all these lines 500 times each. But how about we stop doing that in season 2? People who want to understand this show don't need to hear the same things 500 times. And if people don't pay attention to the show they are watching, then that's on them. Please stop sacrificing the quality of your creative work for the sake of people who aren't interested in your creations in the first place. Another topic I want to discuss is the maturity of the remake. I was actually always a big supporter of the idea to create a more mature version of Avatar, and this remake tried to do that, but in all the wrong places. Showing more explicit violence, like the air nomad genocide, does not make your story more mature. Making your characters act more serious does not make your story more mature. In many ways, this remake feels less mature compared to a cartoon aimed at kids that had to deal with very aggressive censorship. Like I said before, there was a lot of repetition, a lot of telling things instead of showing them, and these things contributed to dumbing down this story. But not everything was terrible, and this is where I want to talk about the one element in Iroh's story that I promised earlier in this discussion. There was this scene between Iroh and this Earth Kingdom soldier, and this was easily one of my favorite scenes in season 1. This moment in the original cartoon was like, let's break Iroh's hands so that he can't firebend. But the live action turned this moment into an exploration of what war does to people. In that Earth Kingdom soldier, we saw a broken man stuck in that cycle of violence. Iroh, as much as we fans love him, is undeniably a war criminal, and the live action didn't shy away from that. His actions killed many people, they changed many people, including that Earth Kingdom soldier who just wanted revenge. And that's how you make the same story more mature. Not through more explicit violence, but by exploring these dark themes that the original show had to dilute for the sake of the children. It were scenes like these that made me enjoy this remake, that made me believe that it's still salvageable even if season 1 had so many things that could and should be criticized. Next, I want to list a few more random scenes and elements that I liked. First, I adored the reference to Iroh's iconic line of "the lotus tile was in my sleeve the whole time," when instead of a slipper, he dropped a lotus tile from his sleeve as a breadcrumb for Zuko. It's a very tiny detail, but I can see that it was very much intentional. Next, I enjoyed how they expanded Zuko and Aang's conversation. One very important thing in the original cartoon were the parallels between these two characters. The Storm episode is the most obvious example, but this duality continued throughout the whole show. When Aang was training, Zuko was training too. When Aang was facing a difficult choice, Zuko was facing a difficult choice too. When Aang was learning some crucial information, Zuko was learning something too. It was an integral part of the original cartoon structure. The live action, unfortunately, lost a lot of that duality, but I feel like they tried to compensate for that in their own way. So, one example was, as I said, the expanded conversation after the Blue Spirit reveal. Another example was Zuko's journal with all the information he'd gathered about the avatars. It's such a nice connection that Zuko indirectly helped Aang throughout this journey so much, even before he joins the team officially. Another thing I liked was how the creators pulled some mythology stuff from the future, including Korra and the comics. For example, introducing the Mother of Faces or giving more information about Kuruk and the spirit world. It shows that the live-action creators know the story they are telling, and it's another reason why I still have hope for seasons 2 and 3 and that they can still somehow bring it all together in a nice way, you know? Another thing I want to address is the philosophy. The original cartoon was obviously very heavily inspired by Eastern cultures and their philosophy. That show had so many iconic and easily quotable lines, and the live action failed badly in that regard. There were so many scenes where they tried to sound smart and vaguely philosophical, but it was just a mix of random words that made no sense. Let me give you a dramatic reading of something that Aang told Katara in episode 1. The monks told me bending is about energy and balance. By feeling the energy around you, you can find balance. By finding balance, you can feel the energy. End of quote. Like, what does that even mean? Now, compare it to the exact same scene in the original cartoon, where Aang told Katara that if she wanted to become a bender, she had to let go of her fear. Now tell me, which line is more memorable? Which line will resonate with the audience more? Which line is applicable in real life? I think the answer is obvious. Another thing the live action tried to copy from the original and failed badly was overusing the slow motion effect. The animators of the original show were master slow-mo benders. They knew how and when to use it to make the show look insanely cool and make the characters have crazy aura. But slow motion effect is such a risky thing. It can make a normal scene look very cheap, and this live action definitely badly missed with how they used this effect. Next thing I want to discuss is the Agni Kai between Zuko and Ozai. It was very messy in the live action. At first, Zuko refused to fight, just like in the original, but then Ozai still forced him to fight. Now, believe it or not, I don't see as big of a problem in this as many other people from what I've seen, because even if they fought, we still saw how Zuko held back because he didn't want to hurt his family. The problem in this scene wasn't Zuko, but it was Ozai himself. In the original cartoon, he felt like this terrifying, unbeatable force, but in the live action, he feels like just a man. He was also obviously holding back in this Agnikai, otherwise nothing would make sense anymore power-wise, and the fact that this fight happened undermined the whole ideological conflict that made this scene in the original cartoon so impactful. So once again, I see no reason to change this other than to include more action for the monkey brain viewers, and if that's the case, then it's very disappointing. The next note I have is about the acting. It was very rough in many places, but I don't think it's the actors' fault. It's the job for the directors and the show writers to give their actors the kind of script that they can actually deliver and to direct the scenes in such a way where the director's touch wouldn't be so visible. These are like technical things that can be improved, especially once the actors settle into their roles more and when the writers know what they are working with. So I have hope that season 2 should be better in this aspect. I also have this note that I debated if I should include in this, but since I'm already doing such a general and long discussion, then let's go all out. In episode 3, there was this scene where Zuko grabbed Katara's scarf as she was passing by and then looked back at her dramatically. Look me in the eyes and tell me this is not a very intentional fuel for the shippers. Avatar ship wars is such a controversial topic, and I know that no matter what I say right now, some people will get angry, so I'll just give you my honest opinion. I am who I am, I think how I think, and I believe that being dishonest is worse than potentially making some people upset with your opinion. So the original Avatar cartoon is a great show, but it's not a perfect show. And one aspect that they executed very, very poorly was the romance plot lines. I hated most of that except Suki and Sokka. So first, let's look at Aang and Katara. I believe that the only reason they exist is because the writers followed the writing conventions of that time. While Avatar overall is a show that aged very well, but the romance in this show betrays that this is a product of its time where the main guy just had to get together with the main girl by the end of the show as some sort of reward for saving the world or whatever. But other than that, there was nothing. Aang had this one-sided crush, and there was nothing from Katara's side, and there was definitely no romantic chemistry between these two. And you can argue that maybe Katara did feel something, but she denied herself those feelings while the war was still happening, but that's nothing more than a headcanon. I'm sorry. Their relationship was very familial. They were like siblings, maybe even like a nanny looking after this kid, and their platonic relationship was great. But when they got together romantically, that just felt so icky. And to this day, I do not understand the decision to end the show with a scene of them getting together when the whole story was never about that. I believe the last shot should have been of the whole group, or maybe Aang alone looking at his friends finally having a moment of peace. So even after all these years, I'm still angry about that last shot of the original show. Now, let's get to the live action. Technically, I wouldn't mind if they erased the romance between these two, and technically, Season 1 seems to be doing exactly that. There wasn't a single scene that could even remotely be read as anything other than platonic, but the problems arise when I look at the context. Korra exists, the comics exist, and there's no way that Netflix won't try to at least set up those storylines for the future, which means that Aang and Katara have to happen, which means that this live-action remake might speedrun their romance in seasons 2 and 3, which sounds even worse than what was done in the original show. I kind of doubt they are willing to drastically reorder the family tree by removing the relationship between Aang and Katara. But let's also look at the other side of the infamous Avatar ship war, which is Zutara. I have so many mixed feelings about this. On one hand, ever since I watched the original show in elementary school, back when I had to rush home from school to catch the new episode on TV, I always thought that Zuko and Katara should have ended up together. In fact, this was the ship that introduced me to the glory that is AO3. But, I don't want the live-action remake to touch that. I don't see how they can make this good in so little time, and like I said, this story isn't about romance and it never was. The problem is that fueling shipping wars is simply profitable for companies, and I feel like they very purposefully planted seeds for that in season 1 of this live-action remake. So when I watched that Katara and Zuko scene in episode 3, one part of me was overjoyed at getting a version of Zutara, and another part of me was absolutely mortified, and I have no idea what the creators of this show might do because they seem kind of unpredictable. Like, you've seen season 2 trailer, right? There was a shot of the blue spirit and the painted lady in the same scene, and I don't know how to feel about that. And with this unnecessarily long rant about shipping that absolutely no one asked for, I think I'll end my video. To be honest, I have more notes, but I've already been talking for an unreasonably long amount of time, and I bet there's like 4 people at most who will make it to the end of this video, so it's better to just end it. In conclusion, I'm still kind of cautiously optimistic for season 2. I know that I criticized season 1 a lot today, but I really had things that I liked too, so I am choosing to be hopeful. If you've made it this far, then you're a legend. Please share in the comments what you thought about season 1, how you feel about season 2, and thank you for your time, and I hope I will see you again in the future for a different video.